Please allow me to start by introducing today's topic. It is on conflict of interest, as you would have heard from the case studies as well as the speech earlier on this morning. And really the crux of the matter of this panel discussion is how can we prevent political patronage and corruption? How is it that conflicts of interest, number one, give rise to these things, and number two, how is it that we can avoid these things moving forward? And on that note, could I invite Professor Prof to lay the groundwork, right, and his thoughts on this and the case studies?
Let me start by congratulating C4 for this report. I've read the first draft. It is going to be a very impressive report. But I want to bring out what really is the significance of the report. And I'd like to go the case study by case study. The first, if you look at the report, what it does is, let's take the case of 1MDB, Felder, Mara, the National Feedlot Corporation. Now those companies that I just mentioned are what we call government-linked companies. And here the interesting thing about the government-linked companies is that these companies, the directors or the chairmen are politicians. So here what we are seeing is what I would call a share of the spoils. Distribute the directorships to politicians. And what happens when these politicians get these positions is they get a lot of stipends, salaries. And what happens with that money is the issue of political financing. Much of this money can also be channeled back into the party's coffers. I would argue much of it is also being used to channel it into the activities of the parties. The second scandal which they drew attention to, which is very interesting, is the Scorpion scandal. Now the Scorpion scandal is very different from the other GLCs because it's personal to the holder. Here it is Najib himself and Razak Maginda and his good friend Lodin Kamarudin. Here we are talking about very covert companies, they are not in the public eye. And here we are talking about companies that have gone transnational. They are international. And that's why it's so hard to trace what they are doing. The important thing about Scorpion is it's very similar to 1MDB because the key characters there are Najib and Lodin Kamarudin. And 1MDB, like Scorpion, was also transnational. I'm raising this point because if before politics and business was very localized, now it's become transnational. And when it becomes transnational, it's very hard to follow what's happening. The third scandal, which was not discussed, but I'd like to bring it up because it's important in today's context, is the PKFZ scandal. The PKFZ scandal is important because it involved an MP from Sarawak, Tiong King Sing. Now, who is Tiong King Sing? He is a very rich businessman. Now here what we are seeing is now businessmen becoming politicians. And this is very common in Sarawak. But now from Sarawak they are transporting that idea of businessmen in politics, becoming key players in terms of financing politics by the involvement as parliamentary. Now this is important because I'd like to come to today. What is happening now post GE14. One of the key issues that we saw was the PKR party election. It's unfortunate Wong Chen is not here. It's unfortunate Nurul is not here, but I'd like them to answer these questions. The presence of the MP from Jalal, a businessman, a rich businessman, who now not only enters politics, he becomes a member of PKR. And he deeply monetizes PKR's party election. Now we are not talking about general election, we are talking about the financing of party elections. And you saw the consequences of it. The split within PKR. What is money politics or politics in business, conflicts of interest situations doing to the very parties that promise change, a different kind of politics? There's another issue which I'd like to bring up today. One of the key issues in countries which have democratized, when they have moved from authoritarian rule to democracy. You can see this in Latin America, for example, the concept of the revolving door. The concept of the revolving door is about how politicians go into politics and then they leave politics, they go back into business and then they come back into politics. This is very common, for example, in Peru. The concept of the revolving door. Now, who are these businessmen coming into politics, leaving, coming back, and so on and so forth? And when they do come in, how do they shape public policies? Among the key figures who can fit into this revolving door concept is Terence. Terence, as you know, was a key businessman who went into politics, left it, came back, and now he's back again. This time as economic advisor. What is the problem with the concept of the revolving door? How do businessmen use their influence in politics to get access to shaping public policies? This is something we have to remember. I'm telling you all this because these are issues that are transpiring today, which then raises the important question I would like to pose today. Ultimately, when we look at all this, this is the question. Where does the power lie today? The concept of power. Who has that power? The reason I'm raising this is because in the past, the key issue that we were most concerned about was the issue of elite domination. In the past, when we talked about elite domination, we talked about Najib. The case studies prove that. Is there elite domination today? Are the parties in the coalition subservient to powerful politicians? Who are these elites? And let's not just talk about the federal level. There are also elites who dominate politics at the state level. And at the state level, it becomes even more interesting because in different states, we have different parties. In Sarawak, we have PBB, a different set of elites there. If you go to Selangor, it's PKR, a new set of elites there. And if you go to Penang, you have the DAP. And if you go to Perak, now we have Bersatu. And Johor, we have Bersatu, ex-UMNO. And what of Kelantan? PAS. And who's to say that PAS is not involved in monetized politics? After all, the scandal involving 90 million ringgit flowing into PAS's account, coming apparently from UMNO, and one wonders where UMNO got this money from. What does all this signify? The idea of governments and shadow governments. Who are these shadow governments? Who are the members of these kitchen cabinets? Who are the elites even at the state level? How do they control our political system? Now I'm saying all this to you simply because we had a national anti-corruption plan which was just released, and I looked at the plan and I thought, okay, now they're going to deal with this structural problem about where power is concentrated and deconstruct all these power structures to create an open, transparent system. And I can tell you now, it's not there. So how can we be expected to believe that corruption and conflicts of interest will not be stopped? And let me just give you one example to show you why I'm dismayed. If you look at the anti-corruption plan, it clearly states that politicians can be directors of GLCs. When you already saw from the case studies very clearly that when you put politicians as directors of GLCs, what are you going to get? Conflict of interest leading to grand scale corruption. And they're repeating the same thing. And they're justifying it now too. If these politicians have qualifications, why can't they sit there? Because it's a conflict of interest. Don't they get it? And didn't they say the same things when they were in opposition? So why are they repeating it? And they are repeating it because it's about political financing. It's because these institutions become bases of power. And it's because with these bases of power, they can then try and control the political system to suit their interest. Is this important? Yes, it is. After all, aren't we hearing about power struggles going on in the Pakatan? In fact, I opened the newspaper yesterday and I heard there's going to be a no confidence motion against the Prime Minister. And there's talk that the Prime Minister is not happy with the Prime Minister in waiting, Anwar Ibrahim. And yet both of them are saying, no, it's perfectly fine. They're all happy with each other. And when they say that, immediately the red flag goes up. I'm raising these points because the case studies presented by our team from C4 draw attention to what happened in the past. Is the past repeating itself? Yes, it is. And that is our big fear. And if the past is going to repeat itself, what are the consequences of this about instituting real reforms, real change in what we now call new Malaysia? I'm not holding my breath. But I am saying this. We should not allow the politicians to get away with this. This is why a forum like this is so important. We can now hold our politicians accountable. There's only one problem. I wish our politicians, when we organize these forums, will sit here and talk with us rather than give a speech and then run off to Parliament. Thank you.